15 Things You Didn't Know About Demonic Possession. Part 1.
If you are brand new to our channel, we invite you to take a moment to subscribe. Just click on the lit red button as well as the gray bell. Why the bell? Well, it will let you know every time we post a new video.
1. Pop culture has a lot to do with it. In case you've been under a rock for the past 40 years, it's worth bringing up The Exorcist. The 1973 movie that started the whole fad is littered with demonic possession trivia and a handful of facts. Mostly, though, it's an entertaining movie fit for Halloween night. The same goes for every possession movie that followed, and there's an endless supply, and the various television shows that incorporate possession into the narrative. See Supernatural. Following The Exorcist, reports of demonic possession skyrocketed and many credit the movie with having popularized the phenomenon and brought it into the popular culture. It's fairly reasonable to assume that popular movies lend themselves to real-life action, and it's unlikely The Exorcist is any different. But, be warned, exorcism, if not demonic possession, is a very serious thing. Whether or not the proposed reasons or effects are rooted in reality, the results certainly are. Remember, movies are fiction. Most of them, at least. 2. Exorcisms are cures, not punishments. How exorcisms are carried out is a bit of a mystery. We know it involves heavy praying, and most likely a dash of holy water, but the specific words spoken and items used are not readily available for public knowledge. What is known, however, is the Catholic Church's view on exorcisms, which is very important to the whole topic at hand. Mainly because they view demonic possession as separate from the person being possessed. Obviously, this believed separation is a decidedly limited one, as it's hard to completely separate the supposed being when it looks a lot like the afflicted. This being said, exorcisms are seen as cures for an illness as opposed to punishment for wickedness, which is why amateur exorcisms performed at the expense of victims' lives are widely criticized. 3. There are many types of possession. Much like anything these days, possession doesn't manifest as just one brand, but as many. While typical demon enters body stories make up the majority, there are various other forms of oppression, as defined by Catholicism. Possession is typically defined as the non-consensual takeover of a human body by outside demons. Subjugation, on the other hand, is volunteer work. Indeed, there are reports of people actively welcoming demons, God knows why, into their physical forms and acting as a sort of willing host of demonic activity. Maybe there are tax benefits. In addition to possession of humans, there is also a form of demonic possession known as infestation. As the name implies, this form of possession involves the demonic possession of household things, animals and even houses themselves. 4. Holy laughter is a thing. A strange phenomenon observed primarily in churches across the world. It gained increased visibility and awareness in the early 1990s in evangelical charismatic churches. That is, churches that believe heavily in the Holy Spirit and its effect on the human soul. Holy laughter is precisely what it sounds like, sudden bouts of uncontrollable laughing that occur in the middle of religious proceedings. Your beliefs aside, church isn't a very funny ordeal, and sudden laughter, while definitely applicable to other things, was first seen as a sort of demonic possession. In fact, famed minister John Wesley encountered holy laughter in several of his meetings and deemed it an act of the devil. More optimistic theories report that it's a supernatural feeling of happiness being granted to certain people by the Holy Spirit. 5. They're often better attributed to other diseases. Human error is especially scary when you consider that what most ancient cultures attributed to demonic possession can now be more properly identified as mental illness. Hell, as recently as 200 years ago, scientists were diagnosing depression as melancholia, and the cure was a mixture of leeches and just waiting it out. So, you can imagine that far more severe and conspicuous ailments like schizophrenia, epilepsy, and Tourette's might be confused for demons. Especially considering there were no CT scans back in those days, and mental health awareness still had a few hundred years until it was of actual concern. Any act of mania or hysteria could be chalked up to "it's the devil." As a result, there were undoubtedly hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent people killed or cured for something they really had no control over. Even more tragic, knowing no better, it's entirely possible that these victims fully believed themselves that they were possessed by the devil. 6. They can be deadly. As widely accepted as the idea of an exorcism seems to be, one has to be cautious when trying to perform one, or even when bringing up the possibility, depending on where you are in the world. There are so many reports of amateur exorcisms being performed all across the world, oftentimes leading to severe injuries and, in the worst cases, death. Just in the United States, priests have beaten supposedly possessed people to death. A 17-year-old girl in New York suffocated her mother, and mental patients have been incorrectly diagnosed. In Glendale, California in 1997, one Korean Christian woman, believed to be possessed, was stomped to death. A 5-year-old girl in the Bronx was even forced to swallow ammonia and vinegar. Demonic possession is an evil and terrifying thing, but the fear of it, and the response to that fear can sometimes be so much worse. 7. Pope John Paul II reportedly carried out exorcisms. Was there ever a pope so beloved as John Paul II? In his life, he united people from almost every culture and denomination, and was roundly celebrated for his goodness and tolerance. His funeral was probably bigger than every birthday you've ever had combined. He was a decent man, and spoke directly to the people in a language they could understand. He also apparently communed with the spirit world by way of exorcism. Reports of the Pope performing an exorcism on a 19-year-old girl are varied, with some claiming that he merely blessed the woman. But that's exactly what they would say if they were trying to cover up an exorcism performed by God's emissary on earth. 8. Mother Teresa was exorcised. Supposedly the holiest person in the land, even Mother Teresa wasn't immune to the tug of the demonic world, apparently. According to BBC, shortly before her death, Mother Teresa was the subject of an exorcism. Suffering from heart trouble, 87-year-old Mother Teresa was admitted to the hospital. While there, though, she began suffering from insomnia, and an archbishop took this to mean that she must be experiencing some sort of demonic possession, no doubt incurred by the nun's fragile state. Consulting with a priest, the archbishop found an exorcist who read a few prayers over Mother Teresa until she ultimately went to sleep. The idea of having to listen to Latin spoken at you repeatedly while lying in bed aside, this was a relatively calm exorcism, if it really was one, as there are no reports of Mother Teresa turning her head 360 degrees around, or vomiting blood on the priest. But who knows what goes on behind closed doors?